Okay, I'll start recording now.
Okay.
And mute myself.
Okay, awesome. So I'll get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're going to talk about academic integrity today. You might be wondering why the librarian is talking to you about academic integrity. So at universities across North America, not just at MUN, universities were finding they were having difficulties with seeing a lot of plagiarism and other forms of academic dishonesty. So one of the things we did at Memorial is we have an academic integrity module that has to be completed by all first-year undergraduate students. So they have to go into Brightspace and successfully complete that online module before they can register for courses for their second semester. So we're trying to figure out how we can make a similar product for graduate students. It's a little more complicated with grad students because you're such a diverse group compared to first-year undergrads. So the library is the body on within the university that got tasked with coming up with the undergraduate academic integrity module, and we are currently working on a similar system, putting something in place for grad students. So in the meantime, what the School of Graduate Studies has asked is, because we don't have that online module finished, librarians are delivering in-person kind of workshops or seminars like this to new graduate students. And so it is mandatory. So if any of the grad students aren't present for this, we are recording it and they're going to be able to watch it afterward. And so hopefully it'll get everybody on the same page about what's expected of them. What do we mean when we talk about academic integrity? We're going to go through what we consider academic dishonesty at MUN, what some of the consequences are, what the process is if you are accused of academic dishonesty or misconduct, some of the recourses that you have. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So if you have any questions at any time, I can't see the chat box. If you type in chat, it like pops up for like a split second and then disappears. Like I just saw somebody just wrote, "I'm stuck connecting." So if it's a really short question, I can see it, but then it disappears again because I have my screen shared. I can't see the chat all the time. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. It's a small group, so I don't mind if you interrupt me at all if you have a question or need clarification. Oh, Nadia's going to stay here to watch the chat. Thank goodness. Thank you, Nadia. That's what Lucas did for me last time. Yeah, it's the big drawback I find of WebEx is when you're in presenter mode, you can't see the chat anymore. So it makes it more difficult for people to ask questions. So feel free to type in the chat now or jump right in and ask a question. I did do another session for grad students about all the ways the library can support you. So if you're wondering how we're delivering our services while we teach remotely, that video is posted. Nida, do you want to jump in and tell them where they can get that link? If you want to unmute yourself for a sec. Maybe not. Oh, maybe you could put the. Oh,
I'm going to put the link. I'll put the link in the chat room.
So I was just going to suggest, perfect. So that was recorded. So if any of you missed that, that was a really great session, lots of great questions, and it'll tell you about all the library services and how to get at them when you're not on campus. So make sure you watch that. My email is there as well if you have any questions. You can also visit the Grenville Library website to book a virtual appointment with me if you need. Okay, so let's get started. So first of all, what the heck is academic integrity? So if you look at the word integrity, so librarians love dictionaries, the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles, one particular definition of integrity. So these are some of the words that we had brainstormed in a session that a person with integrity might be considered. So things like just, fair, trustworthy, ethical, moral, responsible. Those are the kinds of things we think about when we talk about having integrity. So if we look at the Memorial University of Newfoundland Code, and this applies to everyone at MUN, so it applies to myself, all the faculty, staff, and students. All members of the Memorial University of Newfoundland community shall treat others with respect and fairness, be responsible and honest, and uphold the highest standards of academic integrity. So we are all bound by that code. So back to, well, what the heck is it? Okay, academic integrity is principled ethical practice within the university and academic environments. So not just while you're a student, but also when you go out into the academic world after you get your degree, and maybe you're going to be teaching at a university or doing research at another university and publishing, that's still the academic environment. So one of the reasons why this is really important, so not just as a student, but anyone doing research, it's really, really crucial that they have academic integrity. So this is an example of what happens when someone doesn't have academic integrity. So this particular individual here, Andrew Wakefield, you might have heard of him. So in 1998, Andrew Wakefield, a British medical researcher, he published a research paper in the journal The Lancet, claiming to have found a link between vaccines and autism. So after the publication of the paper, other researchers were unable to reproduce his findings or confirm his hypothesis. A little suspicious. And a 2004 investigation identified undisclosed financial conflicts of interest on Wakefield's part. So the British General Medical Council ruled that Wakefield had acted, and I quote, dishonestly and irresponsibly in his published research. The Lancet fully retracted the article, noting that elements of the article had been falsified. His medical license was revoked, but unfortunately, this article, which has been proven to have been intentionally falsified, it created an anti-vaccination movement, which has resulted in the rise of preventable diseases worldwide. So this guy basically did irreparable harm to public health by not acting with academic integrity. It's really important that all of our researchers who are doing scientific research, publishing in journals, hold themselves to a really high standard of integrity. And when you don't, you could actually do harm in the real world to people. And this is a really bad example of it. So the question of why academic integrity? So why is academic integrity important? So if you look at here at Memorial University, it contributes to the vision and values of the university. It protects the reputation of the university within the academic community. It upholds the integrity of academic programs. It contributes to public confidence in post-secondary education. It promotes positive faculty-instructor communication with students. So you don't want your instructor to have a really awkward conversation with you about, why it looks like you might have copied and pasted something into your paper and didn't cite it. And so it also increases student morale and promotes equity for all students. So it's very difficult if you're in a program and other people are cheating and getting away with it. That's really difficult for student morale. We want everyone to be equitable and getting their degree honestly, earn it honestly. Last but not least, you will feel proud of the degree you received from Memorial University. So we want all of our students to be honest. You want potential employers and funding agencies to be impressed with your degree. So you don't want them to think that we're letting people get away with plagiarism or cheating here at Memorial, because it decreases the value of your education and of your degree. So we want to have everyone at the university having really high standards of academic integrity. So what's your role? So some of the things that are your role, obviously you have to complete your own work, accept credit only for your own work, acknowledge other people's ideas or work in your papers, refrain from cheating or taking the easy way out, and act with integrity as you pursue your academic program. And this is really important. Know which actions or behaviors could be considered inappropriate, dishonest, or improper. So it's your role and your responsibility to know what Memorial University considers dishonest behavior when it comes to your coursework. So being familiar with the university calendar and the rules and regulations, it is your responsibility to know them and comply with them. Be responsible and take responsibility for your actions. And this is the policy, the integrity and scholarly research policy that the university has. So this is one of the things, you need to know what policies that the university has that apply to you. And so if you want to have a look at what the actual policy reads, you can just Google Memorial University Integrity and Scholarly Research, and the actual policy is there. So I'll just give you some of the highlights. I won't make you read the whole thing. So these are some of the big things to consider. Okay, so making sure you're citing the contributions of others. So if you're referring to other people's work, whether it's published work or unpublished work, making sure you're citing the source and listing the names of whoever wrote or did that research. Ensuring that all the researchers participating in the research are included as authors. Obtaining permission to use the unpublished work of others and duly acknowledging their work. Respecting the privileged access to information or ideas obtained from confidential manuscripts or applications. Being rigorous in scholarly activity, including experimental design and interpretation of research results, which that Wakefield character was definitely not doing. Obtain permission and acknowledge the use of research methodologies or research data of others. Submitting a paper to only one source for publication is a standard practice in academia. Ensuring that all previous related research and data done by the researchers is cited. And if you would like to know more about the university regulations, make sure you have a look at the calendar. The URL is there, where all of the university's academic regulations are stated very clearly. So be familiar with that as a student. The one that really applies to you is the General Academic Regulations Graduate. So there's different regulations and processes for undergraduate students versus graduate students. And you need to look at section 4.12 on academic misconduct. So that's what applies to graduate students. Okay. So what are some types of academic offenses? So these are some of the things that Memorial considers academic misconduct or dishonesty. Cheating, pretty good one. Impersonation. So that refers to basically writing an exam for another student. Plagiarism, and we're going to talk a lot about plagiarism in just a moment. Obviously, theft, that's a pretty big academic offense. You don't want to steal an exam and distribute it. That's pretty bad. Submitting false information. This is one that not a lot of students know necessarily. Submitting work for one course, which has been submitted to another course, unless you have permission to do so. So you're not really supposed to be writing one paper and giving it to two different professors. And some students don't realize that that is considered an academic offense. Unethical practice and failure to follow the MUN code. So those could all be considered academic offenses. So let's look at a couple of these a little more closely. So obviously cheating, and you've probably been spoken to about cheating by teachers all the way back to elementary school. You shouldn't be copying from other people's work or allowing your work to be copied. You shouldn't be consulting with unauthorized persons or the internet during exams or tests if you're not supposed to, or using unauthorized aids, or knowingly recording false information. So when you're doing your research as graduate students, that's a really important one to remember. That's considered cheating. If you're knowingly recording false information and statistics in your research, that is not a good thing to do. Plagiarism is one that I think a lot of undergraduate students really struggle with. They don't really understand what plagiarism is. They don't know when they're doing it. And a lot of students that we see in first year often have never been told that what they're doing was plagiarism. So first year students will say to me, well, I go to Google and I find some information, and I just put it in my paper. And my high school teachers always said I did really well. They gave me an A. They never told me I shouldn't do that. But plagiarism, we define it at Memorial as the act of presenting the ideas or words of another one as one's own. So when you go and take other people's work and present it as if that was your original writing or your original idea, you're actually plagiarizing the other person's work. So I'll have some examples here of plagiarism, so you try to get the idea of what we're talking about and what some of the consequences are in the real world. So this is a teen fiction author, and she wrote this book in 2006. She was actually a first-year student at Harvard and managed to get a teen fiction novel published. And she had a deal to turn this book into a movie. So you think, wow, that's really impressive. And then people started to notice something right after it was published on the internet. There's actually a whole Wikipedia site dedicated to this novel. So she looked at basically other teen fiction authors like Megan McCafferty and Sophie Kinsella and Meg Cabot. She was basically taking passages from their novels. And you can see here in this example, just kind of changing the character's name or like a few words here and there. So she was copying and pasting from other people's work and got it through a publisher somehow. So once this hit the internet, her book was actually pulled off the shelves by the publisher. Her contract was canceled. She lost her movie deal. So that had a really negative impact on her career, which could have been quite promising. So here's another really public example. So this is historian and political commentator Doris Kearns Goodwin. And this particular book of hers was a 1987 bestseller. In 2002, a newspaper uncovered that she had plagiarized and taken material, so phrases and sentences, from at least 6 other sources and did not credit them. So she reached a settlement with one of the authors. Goodwin publicly stated, "Though my footnotes repeatedly cited her work, I failed to provide quotation marks for phrases that I had taken verbatim," which means word for word. Some water. So Goodwin withdrew all unsold copies of her book, and she claims to be preparing a fully corrected version. But in the meantime, she resigned from her job as a TV news panelist. So it was quite embarrassing for her, and it resulted in her having to resign from her position. So we have another example here. This is a university professor, so it's not just the students who sometimes get in trouble for plagiarism. This was Arizona State University professor Matthew Whitaker. His charges of plagiarism began in 2012 when other faculty began to notice passages from his books were copied from other sources and not cited. It was also found that he plagiarized some of his presentations and speeches, and consequently, he was forced to resign from the university. This is a really bad one. This is Germany's Minister of Defense. So in 2011, his university stripped him of his doctorate after he admitted substantially copying from other sources. Inadvertently, he claims. So a university commission tasked with investigating his dissertation came to the conclusion that Gutenberg had engaged in intentional deception in the writing of his dissertation and had violated standards of good academic practice. The commission found that he had included borrowed passages throughout his thesis without citation and had modified those passages in order to conceal their origin. So he had to resign from politics and actually was stripped of his PhD. So there are very serious consequences in the real world when people are caught intentionally plagiarizing others. Okay, so we'll go through a couple examples here of ways that you can be plagiarizing as a student. So hopefully you'll get a better sense of what not to do and how you can detect plagiarism in your own work. Got lots of examples of that. So some of these titles are from a site called plagiarism.org, which has lots of great information. And it breaks up plagiarists into different categories. So for example, this is a ghostwriter. The student turns in another's work word for word as his or her own. So that one, a lot of students would know that that's dishonest, right? You can't have another person do your coursework for you or write your paper and you just put your name on the top. That's really bad. That's ghostwriting. They like this, I like this one, the photocopier. The student copies significant portions of a text straight from a single source without using quotation marks. So the classic, you go to Wikipedia, copy and paste a bunch of stuff on a topic and just stick it in there. No quotation marks, don't cite your source. So that's also plagiarism. This is the one I see the most, I think, is, I love that they're calling it the potluck paper. The student tries to disguise their plagiarism by copying from several different sources. So instead of just going to one source and just copying the whole thing, like the photocopier, students get a little kind of sneaky, and they're like, oh, well, if I take it from 5 or 6 places, it'll be harder for my professor to figure out what I'm doing. And so they'll try to fit some of the sentences together, but they might tweak them or change them a little bit, but basically they're keeping most of all the original writing. So don't be doing that. The labor of laziness. The student takes the time to paraphrase most of the paper from other sources and make it all fit together instead of spending the same effort on original work. So plagiarism doesn't always save you time. Cheating isn't always a time saver. So in order to try to disguise the fact that it's not your original work, if you put a lot of time into doing that to try to get it past your professors, you really could have just done your original work in the first place. The forgotten footnote, that's if you're using footnoting. You might be using other types of citation. But it's basically when you mention an author's name, but then just neglect to include an actual reference. So sometimes students just do that unintentionally when they're new to citing, if you're using a style you haven't used before. But sometimes students do that intentionally to try to make it difficult for the faculty member to go and locate the original source where they can see, looks like they've kind of copied and pasted a lot here. So one of the reasons why it's really important to know how to cite properly in the style that you're using and to make sure that you're doing it really well is it can be a flag for a faculty member where they haul you in and go, why isn't this cited properly? And maybe you didn't plagiarize at all. But part of being having academic integrity is citing other people's work correctly, right? So make sure you don't I just forgot to include that one. Although sometimes people do it unintentionally, of course, but just be very careful about citing. And I've actually seen this. We had a case like this where a student intentionally provided inaccurate information about the sources. So when you looked at their bibliography, it was just absolutely impossible to locate any of these articles because they intentionally cited them incorrectly. And of course, a lot of times the faculty member, if they are suspicious at all about a paper, that's the first thing they're going to do is try to track down your original sources. So make sure you're citing them correctly. The too perfect paraphrase. So this is when you do properly cite a source. So you include your citation, but you don't use quotation marks around something that you copied word for word. And this confuses a lot of students. So they think, well, I've cited it. But if you copy and you paste and you don't put quotation marks around that to let your instructor know and recognize that that's a quote from another source, it looks like that's your original creative writing. So even if you're citing it, you can't just copy and paste text unless you put your quotation marks around it. So that signals that that is a direct quote from the original source. And if you don't use your quotation marks, you're basically falsely claiming that that's your original presentation and interpretation of the information, when it really isn't. And so that triggers suspicion in a lot of faculty. They've read a lot of papers. And when they see this really perfect, suddenly this very perfect writing, that's quite different than your own writing, they're going to go, is that a direct quote? And there should be quotation marks around it. Okay, so I'll give you a couple examples as well here about examples of students who are trying their best to paraphrase, maybe successfully, maybe not. So this is the original. This is Alan Walter's The English Novel. So the red text is Alan's original essay. And so this is what the student tried to do. So you can see here, Wuthering Heights is the most remarkable novel in English. The most remarkable novel in literature is Wuthering Heights. It is perfect and perfect in the rarest way. It is perfect in a very unique way. So if you keep going here, you can kind of see what the student did. And I do see this a lot with students who are struggling with paraphrasing. So they're not sure how to put something in their own words. And I've seen some students do that little feature in Microsoft Word where they'll hover over a word to get the synonym, and they'll change, well, maybe if I don't say, rarest, I'll say very unique. That's paraphrasing. This is not paraphrasing. So this example here is not paraphrased. This is basically the exact paragraph, word for word, the same sentence structure, but the student has just tried to tweak a word here and there, right? So that's not what we in the English department would consider actual paraphrasing. This has not been reworded enough to be in the student's actual own words. And you can also see there's no quotation marks of any kind and there's no citation. So this would not pass the test. This would be considered plagiarism. So let's try again. So take two, the student's going to try again. See if they're any more successful this time. Okay, so at least there's a citation. So they've got Allen, 1954. So they're at least, there's a citation in there. That's a bit better. But if you look at some of the words that I have in bold there, perfect in the rarest way, individual apprehension, artistic expression is flawless. So those words are not the student's own words, right? Those are Allen's words. And I don't see any quotation marks there. So again, the student isn't paraphrasing. They are taking words from the original, words and phrases from the original, and they're not in quotation marks. And also the way it's cited, it really only looks like the last sentence is from Allen, but actually those first two are as well. So this, again, this is going to be considered plagiarism. So take 3. Let's see if they get it right this time. Here we go. So this is a really great way to start a reference when you're taking it from another source. So right from the beginning, you're like, Walter Allen insists that. So instead of just sticking a quote or a paraphrase in there, beginning acknowledging that I got this from this other writer. So that's a really, really helpful way for your faculty member who's reading your paper to know, oh, okay, what comes next was taken from another source. And you can see that some of the words and phrases that are very specific to Allen do have quotation marks around them, as well as a page number for the page of the book. So this is an example of good paraphrasing and quoting and citing. So this would pass the test. So this is the kind of thing that we want to see. It's really, really clear here where this came from and exactly what parts of it are Allen and what part the student wrote. One more example here. So that's the original, and here is the acceptable paraphrase. So in this case, the student did a really good job of putting something into their own words, and there's a citation there with the author and a page number, which is MLA style. So, you know, sometimes I get questions like, well, what if it's just a fact that everybody knows? So something like the abundance of natural resources was one factor that allowed the Industrial Revolution to begin. That your faculty member might look at that and say, well, says who? You know, where did the student read that? You know, what source did they get that from? So be careful with things that are, people think, oh, well, it's a fact, everyone knows that, but not necessarily. So if you're giving your faculty member any types of facts like that, they're going to want a source for that that fact, if that makes sense. So this is a question I get a lot. How much of the original source can I use before I need to cite it? So I'm going to get you guys to do this little self-quiz. Think to yourself, is it 50 words or more? Or maybe just as low as 5 words or more? How much can I use before I need to cite it? So think about that for a sec. So this was a trick question. So all of those answers are wrong. So any words or ideas that you use from another source must be cited. So somehow there's been this confusion. I don't know where it comes from, but I do frequently get asked that question, that there's some sort of like magic amount of words that you can use, but then once you get to a certain number, then you have to cite that. That's just really incorrect. So even a single word can be in quotation marks and cited. So anytime that you're using anyone else's words or ideas, you have to cite it. So even if it's just one single word, if it's an important, very specific word, that might actually need quotation marks around it. So some of the ways that you can avoid plagiarism. So I've mentioned a couple times now, make sure you acknowledge all of your sources. So spend a lot of time being familiar with the style that you're going to be using while you're a grad student here. Make sure that you know how to cite correctly, and that any of the sources you've used in your paper, please make sure you acknowledge them. Don't forget anybody, don't forget anything. Here we go, properly cite your sources. So it can depend on what style you might be using, depending on what your program is. And if you're not sure if you need help with that, that's what the library is here for, as well as the Learning Center. So you have lots of resources if you're confused or need some help with citing. Include all your sources in your bibliography. Use quotation marks for any direct quotations, phrases, or words. That one's really, really important. Make sure you're paraphrasing properly, like you're truly putting things into your own words. So some of the examples I showed you examples of bad paraphrasing where they weren't really paraphrasing. Make sure you're putting it into your own words. And if you're struggling with that, which is perfectly okay, it's always better to just use a direct quotation. If you really can't reword it any other way, just use a quote. That's fine too. And then even if you are putting it into your own words, you still have to cite it. And I have a lot of first-year students. I'll say to them, when you were in high school, how many people were told, You don't need to cite it as long as you put it in your own words. And like half the class raised their hand. And I'm like, what teachers are telling people this? So that's not true. If you're putting it into your own words, you still have to cite it. You still have to cite where that original idea came from. And the number one way, actually, to avoid plagiarism, they've done a lot of research with students who have been accused and proven to have been, they admitted, yeah, I plagiarized. They do a lot of follow-up research, and they ask the students, well, why did you do it? And the number one answer that they get across the board in all these studies is the student ran out of time. That tends to be the big issue with plagiarism. So a student is there, in the library, it's midnight, the assignment or the paper's due the next morning, and that is when that temptation to copy and paste, to pad the paper, oh, I need 500 more words, what am I going to do? We do know, like, scientifically, that is the main reason students plagiarize. So the main way to avoid plagiarizing is avoid procrastinating. And I know that's hard. You guys are incredibly busy as grad students, but the earlier you can start your research, the earlier you can reach out for help with how to cite your sources, the earlier that you can start writing, the better. And you're going to be in a situation where you're not going to be tempted to plagiarize. Okay, so our next section is what happens if you are accused of academic misconduct. So I think it's important to know what the process is as a grad student. So I'm just going to grab my notes here. So basically there's 3 different levels of academic misconduct. So level 1 is used for minor offenses. And I have a definition coming up of what do we mean specifically by minor offenses. That's actually defined in the calendar. So minor offenses can be resolved at level 1, and they're resolved between the professor and the student. And these are always informal. So a lot of things can be resolved by your instructor might ask you to come see them in their office, and you have a little conversation about your work. And sometimes it is, there's something in the paper that you did not plagiarize, it was just an accident. Maybe you accidentally didn't cite something right, or you left something out unintentionally, and that gets resolved like that. Other times, maybe you actually did plagiarize, and then you and your professor can work out what that resolution would be. So some of the resolutions typically is a rewrite. Sometimes for undergrads, they might have to take a 0 on an assignment. So there's different ways that the professor and student can come to an arrangement about how to proceed. What sometimes happens is resolution can't be agreed upon. So maybe you don't like the resolution. In that case, you would go to level 2. So level 2 is at the unit level, and that's between the instructor, the student, and the unit head. Now that's going to be formal. So the processes are outlined in the university calendar in 4.12.5. So there's a very specific formal process of resolution for that. And then the most serious is level 3. And that is basically investigated by the Dean of Graduate Studies and the School of Graduate Studies Investigations Board, which is based in St. John's. That's a formal procedure, and it's outlined in 4.12.6. Now, sometimes you can go right to that level. So it's always an option for the student as well as the professor. If there's no resolution at level 1, you can go right up to level 3 immediately and skip level 2. That is a possibility. Okay, so we'll go over what is a minor offense. So level 1, minor offenses are resolved by the accuser and the student. The head of the appropriate academic unit should be notified of the situation if the student was found guilty and a resolution was possible, if a resolution was not possible, or if one party is dissatisfied with the resolution. So I mentioned, there could be dissatisfaction with the resolution, or if the student is found guilty, then they are going to have to go to the head of the appropriate academic unit. Okay. And so, I was just going to talk about, I wanted to talk about what if minor offenses are excluded. So things that are not considered a minor offense, any sort of misconduct on an exam, impersonation, so taking an exam for someone else, or any forged documents, that's not going to be considered minor. So those are not going to be a level 1 offense. If a head thinks it's, quote, a major breach of university regulations, that would not be considered minor. And repeat offenses are not going to be considered minor. So if you have been found guilty before and you get accused again, that's not going to be a level 1 resolution. So those are some of the things that are not minor. So we're really talking about, first offenses and things like pretty much plagiarism is tends to what gets resolved at level 1. Then level 2 is at the unit level. So as I mentioned, that's 4.12.5 if you are having insomnia and want to read university calendars. I think we're trying to call. So the head of the appropriate unit will try to resolve the matter with the accuser and the student. And so I've got the unit heads listed here on this slide, so make note of who the unit head is for your program. And so it will only be referred to the Dean of Graduate Studies if a resolution is not possible or one party is dissatisfied with the resolution. And then this is level 3, this is the serious level. So it does go to the School of Graduate Studies, so that's 4.12.6. And as I mentioned, that's decided by the Investigations Board, but there is a right of appeal. So students can appeal the decision to the Senate Committee on Academic Appeals through the Office of the Registrar. So if you do feel that you're falsely accused, you do always have the right to appeal. Some of the possible consequences. So I mentioned at the unit level only, typically it's resubmission of work with appropriate reduction in grade. That's a pretty common solution, a resolution that is decided on between the faculty and the student. When it starts to go to the higher levels, the consequences are more serious, obviously. So you could have a formal reprimand, you could have a reduction of grade. Some of these very serious consequences would only be I guess imposed is the word I'm looking for, by the that investigations board. So that could be probation, it could be suspension, expulsion, or rescinding of degree. And we have cases where that has happened at other universities, like I mentioned, like the German chancellor got his PhD taken away from him. But that would only be for very serious offenses and at that level 3. Okay. So I do like for students to know their rights though. So even if you are accused of plagiarism, you can still pursue your research, you can still attend classes, labs, or other educational activities. Please know that if you are found guilty though, depending on the penalty, you may not receive credit for work completed during the investigation. You absolutely can consult with advisors or facilitators. So you've got your student union, you can go to a Grenfell counselor, you can go to a faculty member that you trust. This person can attend all meetings concerning the investigation with you. You also can have your case referred directly to the Dean of the School of Graduate Studies. So as I mentioned, that's always an option. So you can go right to that level 3, go right to the Dean. But it's recommended that resolution should be sought at the lowest possible level because obviously the lower level of resolution has lower penalties. So if you really do feel that you're being falsely accused, you could demand to go right to level 3 and go directly to the Dean. But then if you were found guilty, you are risking a slightly higher penalty. So those are just some of the things to consider. And you can always appeal, as I mentioned. You can appeal decisions of investigations boards to the Senate Committee on Academic Appeals. So you do still have rights. There's people you can reach out to. You can still appeal. So we don't want to feel like you don't have any rights as a student. Helpful tips, members, start your research early. Of course, the librarian is telling you, start your research early. If you don't know what your professor expects, ask. That's a really important one. I have a lot of students come to the library asking me about what they should do for an assignment, and I'm like, I'm not marking your assignment. So have a look at, if you've been given any sort of assignment, handout, or any information in your syllabus. If you're not sure, talk to your professors. That's the biggest piece of advice I could give you. It's better to ask for an extension than to cheat. So your professors want you to succeed. They're understanding. They don't want to see you doing anything that might be considered dishonest. They would much rather you come and ask, I need more time, rather than feeling like you need to cheat to get it done in time. And make sure you take initiatives to seek help. So there's lots of ways to get help. The Learning Center is a really great resource. You can, if you Google Grenfell Campus Learning Center, it'll go right to their webpage. And they have ways that you can book online for virtual appointments. They have a full-time writing person who can help you with your writing and your papers, answer questions about citing. The library is a really great resource when it comes to citing sources properly. So visit our website. We've got lots of help guides for various different types of styles. There's a whole bunch of them, so make sure you know which style to use and use it correctly. But we've got help on our website for APA, MLA, and Chicago primarily. And you can always reach out to me if you have questions about how to cite something. Also on our website, and I mentioned this in the library session that was recorded, so if you want to go check that out, we do have advice around what's called citation management software that you might have heard of. So there's different softwares out there, like some of them are called, like there's Zotero and Mendeley and EndNote, and they can really help you manage your sources that you're finding and help you cite them. So that's another really great resource, and I talk a little bit about those in the library video. Your professors are there to help you, right? So don't be afraid of your professors. Don't be afraid to reach out to them, to talk to them, to ask them questions. They'd much rather you did that than flounder around, not sure of being what to do. And there's a great website, mun.ca, Writing Center / plagiarism. So that's the Writing Center in St. John's. They have a really great web resource about plagiarism and how to know when you're plagiarizing and how to avoid plagiarizing. So there's so much help. So really just take advantage of the help that's there. Be mindful of what we consider academic misconduct. Have a look at the calendar, and then if you have any questions, reach out. For questions about academic integrity and university regulations, so other sources that are really knowledgeable about the calendar and all the rules would be your graduate student union, the registrar's office. They know everything about the university calendar, and again, your professors. Okay, and that's it for me. I'm going to stop sharing.
There's a couple questions there, Crystal, in the chat.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
One from Samira.
Yeah, so hopefully, Samira, in order to detect plagiarism, so hopefully you got some of the answers to that question from this presentation, some of the things that we consider plagiarism. So it's less about detecting it in your work, it's more about when you're using the sources, if you follow some of the guidelines that I've given you, like if it's a direct quotation, if you're using copy and using paste, make sure your quotation marks are around there. Make sure that you're paraphrasing properly, and if you're paraphrasing or using a quote, definitely have to cite it, right? And including all your sources and acknowledging your sources properly. That's basically, you won't need to try to go back and detect your plagiarism. If you're following that as you're writing, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. We need to have Turnitin software. Yeah. I know. This has been an issue that's been going on for a couple years. I know. We basically had, so some of you might have heard this before, sorry to bore you with it again. There was a committee at some point that was struck to look into some of these softwares where you put your paper in and it lets you, it kind of like gives you a red flag if you plagiarize something. The committee decided that Memorial should not adopt one of those softwares. One of the biggest pushbacks that they got apparently was actually from the student unions. And the student unions had a lot of problems with some of the companies and their policies. Sometimes there was issues with like false positives being generated. So if a faculty member put a paper in, it would flag it as plagiarism when it wasn't, things like that. There was privacy concerns. So as of right now, the university does not have a Turnitin subscription. But I know that is something that the grad studies folks and the students have been very vocal about. And it's something that I've been trying to like push up the pipe to administration. So it's not that that I wouldn't want us to have Turnitin or that some of your faculty members here wouldn't want Turnitin. Like we've actually been advocating for it. But I can tell you we're not getting a lot of traction once it leaves Grenfell and kind of goes to like upper administration. It kind of just died there. So we haven't given up. We're still bugging them. We're still working on that. We're still letting them know that especially the graduate students would really like to have access to that. Yeah, you do have Grammarly, but you're correct. Grammarly's not quite as robust as something like Turnitin. So I know I'm fighting for it, just know that. And hopefully we'll have better news soon and we can convince the folks up there that we should have an institutional subscription. That's a great question. Here we go. Excellent. Oh, Samira says, I received my answers during the slides. Oh, Perfect. That's what this was here for. Yes, hopefully university will manage it soon. I agree. Yeah, I think we do need Turnitin for sure. So without Turnitin, that's why I'm here, giving you all this presentation. So hopefully it answered some of your questions, made you more aware of some of the issues, and some of the processes that we have in place around academic integrity. And is there any other questions? I'll give it a second if someone has another question in the chat. Thanks for all those URL links, Nida. That's great. Good, no more questions. So I think we're done. I don't want to keep you guys. I know you're all super busy. So if there's no more questions, thanks for coming. And make sure you watch the video about library resources so you know all of the great ways the library is here to help you. That'll be a great resource for you. And you can always reach out to me. Like I said, you can book a virtual appointment with me. I use Zoom. We can have a little Zoom session if you need some help. You can send me an email. And there's staff in the library on the Grenfell campus Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. doing contactless pickup of library materials. And if you have a question, you can always call the library during those times because the staff are in there doing things like scanning material and doing document delivery for people and stuff like that. Excellent. Okay. So thanks, guys. Good luck. Hopefully someday we'll get to meet in person. I'll be able to see you all. You can come into the library in real life. That would be great. But for now, good luck with remote learning, and let me know if you need anything.
Thanks, Crystal.
Awesome. Are you going to end the meeting, Miss Nida?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Thank you, sweetie. Thanks so much for setting this up.
Thanks.